previously everything had been SISO, right? So everything had just been, you've got a controller, you've got a process. And every one of these signals was just like one thing at a time, okay? And so what we'd learned is like how common controllers work. Actually, like, you know, we did CPN, and then we did like a lot of like CPB has all been about like, what is this thing called a controller? How does that work? And each one of these signals has just been one thing at a time. Now, right, so suddenly we open this new door where now suddenly we have the opportunity of having things affecting one another, right? So we now have interaction. And so we now have maybe a controller, one controller and another controller. And suddenly we have choices, right? So because now we have a choice about which of these controller outputs to use to control specific outputs. You know, and in the big MIMO scheme of things, so this is a 2x2 kind of thing, but you can imagine that there's like a whole set of these where we have maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 controllers, right? So now we have multiple controllers. And one way of thinking about theme 7 is how do we do the calculations associated with multivariable control? So as a very basic idea, if this is kind of 2 temperatures, T1 and T2, how do we figure out whether we should use Q1 or Q2 if we're talking about a TC lab kind of thing, right? So how do we figure out whether we should use this heater to control that temperature and this heater to control that temperature? Or maybe it should be the other way around, right? Maybe this configuration isn't the one that we're looking for. How do we break the tie? How do we decide between those two? And that's kind of that's where we leave theme 7, is just with calculations, assuming that we've got some kind of a model of all of this stuff, right? So if we and that's much similar to what we've had before, is a lot of the control calculations that we've been doing. Then we have the ability to kind of predict what's going to happen using that model. So we have a lot of knowledge about how this works, right? Then in multivariable, we just have bigger models. But something else happens in theme 8. In theme 8, we have no models, right? In theme 8, we just have diagrams. And so in theme 8, we still have this problem. So we introduced the idea that we have multiple controllers in theme 7, right? And in theme 7, if we have models, we can do calculations and we can figure things out. If we don't have those things, what do we do? Now we're kind of doing control philosophy now. So now it's saying, well, in general, you know, we would like to choose controlled variables that, you know, would cause trouble, for instance. So this is almost all the way back to theme 1, where we would identify and say, oh, this level, that's probably going to be a controlled variable. This distillate concentration, that's probably going to be a controlled variable just because it's important to the process. And so actually theme 8 contains almost no calculations. We've been doing all of these calculations, you know, and it's kind of easy to understand what a problem looks like on some of these levels. If I tell you, oh, design a Dolan controller for this process, that's a set of formulas, right? But in theme 8, we move away from that, and it actually looks more like literature. You're studying documents and you're writing words. And the solution to a problem in this case would perhaps look like just drawing lots of different control elements onto this diagram in order to explain what your control philosophy looks like, rather than actually doing any calculations. Now, there are some of these examples that are backed up by examples that have calculations attached to them. But what you'll notice when you go through the reading in this section, in this whole study theme, and I've got to prime you for it, is that what is basically not there at all is any calculations.